company called CAWS, who essentially deal directly, and I won't try and explain this too much. I'll let you, Mel, but deals directly with COVID patients with long COVID, etc., on rehabilitation, etc. But I'll pass over to Mel and explain about the company, what you guys do, and specifically for the people you work with, and also what it does for PTs as well. So over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on, and good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing all right amidst all the more crazy curveballs that are being thrown at you all left, right, and centre. As Nick said, we've been a little bit busy our end. I guess to provide a little bit of a backstory so that you guys know where we're kind of coming from, really. Nick had said that it might be nice by way of intro to share our story a little. So as Nick explained, I'm co-founder of CAWS, but my fellow co-pilot is a guy called Dr. Carl Robertson. I met Carl originally probably about 6 or 7 years ago through Under Armour. And given his background in elite level pro sport research, clinical practice, and my background in fitness and education, between us, we work with, hundreds, thousands of clubs, coaches across the world. And we were very much like on the same page about the fact that when we've been working with coaches and clubs, there was always these very common gaps around education and understanding that you guys wanted to access more of, or, access full stop. And for whatever reason, as a sector, we hadn't been able to access that, bottle it and put it out there as kind of an education course. And Colin and I just sort of got a little bit frustrated on behalf of coaches and clubs that was a thing. So we'd always had in our minds this notion of creating an education company, and we'd always talked about it. And sort of around 18 months ago, we started to put that together. And the notion of the business then was to pull on Cole's experience in sports, science, medicine, and my experience of the sector to create content, courses, whatever you guys felt that you need to move forward with your job. So we started to work on education curriculum that we felt that people was asking for the most and would be most beneficial to everybody, really. Then, of course, COVID, which hit us all between the eyes back in March, pretty much properly last year. And so as he and I started to look at, like, what really could we be doing to help the situation, like genuinely all we wanted to do was kind of roll the sleeves up and help coaches and clubs to get through the shitstorm that everyone was dealing with at the time. And we sort of had a bit of a moment of clarity, really, where we realised that as a sector, we ought to expect that coming out of lockdown, so at the time we're talking about, we were thinking like July 2020 at the time, obviously. So we were thinking, coming out of lockdown, us as a profession, we're going to be dealing with 3 key types of population, most likely. Those that have had COVID or long COVID, which back then we knew to expect, but it wasn't like a household name as such then. So that group, the group that we already work with, all of our clients and members already who've been stuck at home with one dumbbell for God knows how many months and are kind of questioning whether or not they want a gym membership or they want PT anymore, and how to like keep those guys engaged and reinvigorated. And I know you guys have done a ton of work with all of your coaches on that sort of stuff. So that kind of middle population. And then the third group was kind of, we understood that as we would open our doors again in July, we'd have a ton of people that have been the sheltered group, the vulnerable group during COVID, living with cancer, cystic fibrosis, they might have had a stroke, etc., that have kind of like had a bit of a shot across the bow of their fitness status, and they don't want to be those that shelter the next time around. They kind of want to have their best foot forward. So data was showing that as coaches and clubs, we ought to expect that we're going to have more of those people coming through the door in July, asking us questions about how they can bolster their health. And what we didn't want to happen was when that did happen, that, you know, you guys weren't ready to be able to respond to that potential new client or you know, that new member query. So this was kind of all this Jerry Maguire moments that we were having way back in March with these three populations. And then we kind of thought, well, shit, we've actually got, based off of the curriculums we'd already started to work on, we'd got the means to be able to help clubs and coaches to respond to those guys. And rather than sort of sit on our hands with that information, we figured it made sense to sort of package it into a few short courses that people could take advantage of, really. So first kind of port of call was, we went to UK Active, and you guys know this, I've told you this story, haven't I? We went to UK Active and basically said, we can create these 3 short courses now if it's going to be of value to people. And my words were pretty much, if you think it's shit, we won't do it. And UK Active said from the get-go that it was something that they'd like to get behind. It's been on the agenda for the industry, but like people hadn't been quite sure how to tackle it. Everyone was still kind of course spiraling from the event of COVID itself. So from the get-go, we've had the support of UK Active and Europe Active and CIMSPA to drive these 3 programs forward. And then, kind of full disclosure, my other business that I set up 6 years ago in fitness obviously pretty much shut down overnight because of the COVID situation. But what that did allow us to do was I threw my bounce back loan into setting up CAWS, which allowed us to move very quickly on it. So that's what we did, and then spent a lot of hard graft over the summer period, filming and building and watching and editing, etc. And so those short courses went online first kind of at the start of November. And I guess just to round that whole story up, which is why you guys and I have kind of jumped on today, is over that time period, what we've become best known for, I guess, is Rebuild, which is the course that teaches trainers and coaches how to rehabilitate someone from COVID and long COVID. And we didn't expect that, in all honesty. Like, I expected all 3 programs to be of equal interest and of equal need. But because, this was conceptualized in May and stuff has changed so significantly, which none of us would have expected. So, of course, as a result of that, Rebuild has become, I guess, our flagship, really, and what people are picking up the phone for at the moment, wanting advice on how to respond to clients and member scenarios.
I think what's funny is, like, when we first established what you were doing and I messaged you and I was like, what is this? How can we get involved? How can we help? I come off that conversation with you and went straight onto a live with Nick, and we chatted from it, and we were like, at first, it's that it takes you back, doesn't it, to go, how have you put this together in a short space of time? And more importantly, how have you got the evidence to get to this point that we know that it works? So I think there was always that for us to want to learn more. And I think that's probably a lot of personal trainers are going to think, well, we've only had this for 10 months. Where has the evidence come from? Like, how has Rebuild then started to support personal trainers to rehabilitate these people and so on? Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about Rebuild as a course and as a program and some of the PTs kind of stories and so on?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, very happy to. Also, just to point out, I'm still shivering because I've just had a really cold smoothie, and I was saying to the lads as we dialed on, I'm shaking here, so yeah, that's a bit awkward. So apologies for that. Okay, so yes, it is a new virus. It's completely a novel virus, and we get asked that question a lot. Like, how could you know back in May what to prescribe to coaches to go through and so on? We're super fortunate in that Carl, so my business partner, Carl's background is heavily biased. Whilst he's done, Olympic level coaching, etc., he owns a gym, has been a hands-on coach for 25 years. He also has a really biased background in clinical research and science. and in the rehabilitation from disease. So he specializes a ton in the rehabilitation and prehab for cancer, reversibility of diabetes. So that's the world within which he operates in. And because of that, he's had access from the beginning to the up to the minute research that comes out of all of those relevant departments so far as development of vaccines concerned, what we know about the virus, testing, etc., etc. He's also consulted for World Health on COVID-specific projects, in particular the transmission of saliva in like a crowded stadium environment when people are shouting and effectively spitting on each other. What's the likelihood of transmitting COVID and so on? So that's kind of the world he lives in. And I guess to add weight to that, most recently he's now sits on a panel with Health Education England, which debates a lot of topics like this, and then how that sort of information and that sort of science then filters its way down through into the health profession, and then also, of course, our profession. So it's important to point out that Cole's background is quite dynamic and quite profound in the resources and the data and the science that he has access to. That said, though, the principles of recovery from any virus, and Cole will speak to this much better next week rather than I will, of course, but they can be very similar in that way. So some key crossovers from previous viruses and learnings in those areas we can bring over to rehabilitation from COVID, and then just add to that some nuances. We're very aware, though, that it is such a new virus, and even just, well, as everybody knows, in the last 6 weeks, the development of the vaccine, new strains, new versions, and there's likely to be other new versions of the virus and new strains as we move forward, because that's the nature of what a virus does. So the onus then is on us as a company and as on, Cole as lead researcher on this. So every time new research and content emerges, that we add to the course and we edit those bits in so that it's ever changing and it's not static, and we can be as responsive to that as possible. So how we, to your question, Ant, about how we built the course, we tried to keep it as super simple as possible to go through as a learner. So you kind of open up where we get stuck into like the fundamental concepts of COVID. So what is it as a virus? What does it do to the human body? What damage does it cause? As someone who's gone through COVID, how does that impact you, not only physiologically, but on how you would normally go about your daily business, your daily fitness routines, etc., etc. That's a massive area for us, and you both know that I can be super preachy about this as a topic, because quite often COVID can be quite readily misunderstood about how severe an impact it can have on a person. So we go super heavy on the fundamentals piece at the very beginning, and then we start to talk about like testing principles, and we recommend certain testing procedures that you would use on a client who's experienced COVID, so you can get an idea of the sort of damage that it's invoked. So we would talk about what those are, why they're relevant. They're not new tests. They may well be tests that some of our coaches haven't done with a person before, but it's not a test that we've invented. It's a test that through history and science we know is going to give us an assessment of somebody's like cardiovascular start point, strength start point, flexibility, and so on. So we'll talk through that rationale, and then all of the guys will then be taught how to administer those tests, the protocols for that, the data that comes out with that, what that tells you about the severity of the symptoms that someone endured through COVID, and kind of where best to lead them on from there. A key kind of point we talk about a lot, which is something kind of which people could take away now if they're already talking to people who've had COVID, is as a sector and as coaches, we very much work backwards from an end goal, whether that's a, you guys know, like a fat loss goal or a race or whatever. Whereas with COVID, it's very different. It's all about kind of small, like the smallest meaningful change, and working forwards instead. So that's a big piece that we focus on in the middle. And then thereafter, it's just about designing all the usual stuff, but designing the right programming and periodization, but in the context of COVID-19, that can take someone from, in some instances, like a really shitty, severe scenario that they're in, right through to normal levels of fitness. And if they haven't had a relationship with fitness before, even into like hyper levels of fitness and like a whole new lease of life that maybe they hadn't discovered prior to that. And then of course, like we bolster in other stuff around nutrition and how nutrition can support recovery, as well as some additional context from, you know, medical experts, industry experts, and recovery experts that aren't just us. Do you know what I mean? It shouldn't all be about our opinion. So it's about providing as much access to the guys of people across the world that know what they're talking about when it comes to COVID as possible.
It's huge, that, isn't it? Because I think sometimes when we're, and I'm talking on behalf of PTs, is that we're obviously so hyper focused on keeping our business afloat now and focusing on our current clients. And then obviously a lot of guys, there's even new guys, we've got on 40 or 50 guys that have literally started but never actually gone into a gym. So they're starting their business fresh online, trying to thing. But this isn't, and I think the perspective I always take on this is that COVID isn't going to end when the gyms reopen, and COVID isn't going to end when lockdown stops. COVID's going to be, we're going to be dealing with COVID and the aftermath of it for a significant time to come. And so the more frequently trainers are going to come into contact with people who have had COVID, dealing with long COVID, that number's only going to increase and the frequency is only going to increase as time goes on. So I think that's huge from a confidence perspective of trainers to understand, okay, I'm not just going to wing it here. I'm just going to kind of guesstimate. I've got the relevant testing procedure that's going to give me the understanding of where that person's at. And as you said, then the kind of normal protocols and specific protocols come into place for dealing with that.
Yeah, 100%. One of our very first course grad actually put that really nicely. And he said, I haven't had to reinvent myself. I just needed the tools in the context of COVID to know how to best advise my clients. It wasn't like, you know, starting from scratch and starting over. It was just putting like a, I guess for want of a better word, like a COVID filter over what you might already be doing. And you're so right, Nick. I think as I said kind of previous just now, we never really understood, none of us did, anybody listening never understood the gravity of the number of people that would be affected. And I guess just for context, and I know we hear the shit on the news constantly all the time, but this is just quite a nice, succinct way of thinking about it. Like pre-Christmas, we did a presentation on like December 12th or something, and 1.7 million people had COVID just in the UK at that point. Today, 3.12 million people have had COVID. So in 30 days, almost 1.5 million people have had COVID, compared to the previous 9 months, it was 1.7. So I know everybody's like talking about rates and we're hearing this on the news, but that in itself in 30 days is insane. So Colin and I did like a little FAQ session on Thursday last week. And I guess we might have been at 2.6 or 2.8 or something. And he passed a remark in the session and said, oh, you know, we could be at 3 next week or whatever. And lo and behold, you know, we are at 3. And I don't want to like scaremonger people and get people to panic or any of that nonsense. But the reality is we could get to March and there could be 6 million people affected. And if you think like in terms of where us guys will operate, like, I guess, I don't know what, 12%, 14% of the population is currently a fitness convert, as it were. So we could be, I mean, not all those 6 million are clearly fitness advocates, obviously, but you're talking like in real terms, like 50% of the total fitness population could be affected by COVID, which is nuts, like to your point. So we've definitely seen, coming out of Christmas, we've interacted more with coaches who've had clients come to them after the Christmas period and say, I've had COVID, what do I do? So that's happening a little bit more as kind of an inquiry. And I guess it's mainly for now clients or members that already have a PT relationship that are asking the question because they have a certain level of understanding, but also they have like a higher frustration because they know what they're usually capable of, and they're like, what's happening? I can't achieve what I would normally achieve in the gym. I feel like shit. We know that people who normally train have a better handle on when something's not right.
Yeah.
So that's bothersome for them from the get-go. But there's definitely like a wider appreciation. We've had phone calls like the last few days from people saying, I've got COVID. I know what I'm like. I'm going to be wanting to do my usual 5K, 10Ks. And I know that's not the right thing to do. So what do we do? So in that instance, we'll signpost them to one of our grad coaches for them to work with. But they're like, that's the minority. They're the people that, like we say, have a sense of like body awareness and health. But there's also, you know, tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of people that have absolutely zero clue and that are flailing in the wake of what they've experienced, and they kind of don't know where to start, which I guess is, and which was what you were talking to earlier when I did my little Instagram rant about the fact that there's so many people over the country now who don't know what they're doing. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to ask the right questions. And these are people who have been bedridden for 9 months. They've got depression. They're off work for the longer term. They're losing hope. They don't know what to do. And it's painful to watch and to read, and it's hard. And I spoke to a guy just Monday, Ironman, like endurance athlete. Unbelievably, he got COVID in January, and has still got long COVID now. But what happened with him is I found him through like a Facebook group, which has got groups of people with long COVID that are still struggling, and kind of read his pleas for help, really. So like dived in. And with him, he's a convert, right? So he's used to pushing through. I feel a bit shit, but you know, I'm not gonna be a pussy about it. I'm gonna crack on and do my best and get on the bike and whatever. So this guy pushed through in the early phases. He was a commuter cyclist into London as well as being an Ironman athlete. Actually fainted on his commute into work because he was pushing himself when he hadn't ought to be. So then he started to sort of pull back, and then this is very common, then he'd feel a little bit better, and then he'd push on again, but he'd push himself too far. And he'd find that it got to the point where he'd been teetering on this edge and messing about with kind of his threshold limits for such a time. He'd go for like a mild run, which for him was quite low key, and then he'd do some like DIY at home, and then he'd be physically sick for a few days and then couldn't get out of bed again. So he'd gotten to sort of those extremes, and then because he has a little bit of his health and, you know, some sense of fitness, he'll then pull right back and do very little in an effort to try and recover. But then his fear was, well, I feel like I'm losing my baseline fitness. I'm going to lose all my gains. So then he starts sort of freaking out about that. So then these sort of characters will meddle with, well, what's my middle line? I can't go too far. I'm not going far enough. What's going to help me to progress, recover, and rehabilitate down the middle? But it's the middle line that they haven't. How on earth would they figure that out on their own? And that's where our sector and coaches come in as the professional to go, I will be the person that guides you down the right path, because I understand your body physiologically. I understand the impacts it's had. I understand how to progress a person, program a person sensibly. And they're the authority on those sorts of decisions. Because this is where the long COVID thing becomes so toxic, because it's a little like, for every kind of, you know, 2 steps forward, it's always 5 steps back. And then it gets down to, as you can tell, this irritates me, this whole topic, but it gets down to people who've had long COVID start recommending to other people that have had long COVID, oh, I take these supplements, I do this, I've started doing that yoga class online at 8 a.m. What? Like, it's all just like self-perpetuating a really toxic situation, unless we dive in and go, no, like, let us help you make the right choices so that you can move forward safely.
And it's a difficult one because, right, and I don't mean to dig out our industry, because obviously we're doing a lot to help and prevent and support people and all of that. But at the best of times, when it comes to staying in our lane, there's a lot of personal trainers that aren't great at that. Let's be real, right? Whether that's back pain, whether that's knee pain, whether that's whatever it is, rehabilitation, it's because I need the money, I'm going to support you and I'm going to try my best, and I might go off and research and go and find all of this. Now, so there's that side of it, which is obviously we don't want that when it comes to this. There's also that, I suppose, that bias and potential fixed mindset, depending on how emotional you've got with all of this whole COVID thing as a personal trainer, as to how much you're bought into the whole thing, to then if someone approaches you or even tells you they've had it, to even acknowledge it and then just do damage further down the line. Do you understand what I mean? And I don't want to scare people and I don't want to put people down, but we now have this, we now have CAWS, and we now have this program that gives you that peace of mind, that gives you that clarity, that direction, that confidence in that client care is at the forefront of your mind. And if you have got a client or two, which will happen, that comes to you with this, that you've got that in the back pocket and you're constantly developing yourself through that process, that's also probably going to be used as kind of transferable knowledge with other things that come your way in the future. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's huge. Can you just tell us, because I've got loads of questions and I know a lot of them that I need to save for next week. Can you just tell us about Rebuild in a little bit more detail, about what it looks like, how it's delivered, all of that type of stuff?
Yes, of course I can. Just to your point real briefly though there, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think at for right now, Colin and I preach very heavily on the fact that as a sector, clubs are the premises, they already exist. It's an infrastructure across the country that people in every community, especially with you guys, because the estate and the reach that you have, that exists. And the coaches have, without a shadow of a doubt, the right background skill sets to be able to move forward on it, just if they just add this little context in. But you raised a couple of really good points there on the refer out. For right now, we can own this and we can dominate it and we can be the solution. One thing we talked about just as a business this last week is one thing we'll need to keep an eye on is with the developments of the new strain and stuff. Because at the moment, the symptoms and the sort of the effect it has on a person, as we understand it, whilst it's more transmissible, the effect is relatively the same.
Right, so that's one of my questions for Cole.
Go on. So, yay, I got a Cole question in. So that's still relatively the same, but we'll have to keep an eye on that, because if it gets much more complicated, obviously there may be instances where we have to, say to you guys, yellow flag, red flag, once it gets to this, signpost someone out and back. And then on the transferable piece, 100%, I mean, we've got a massive cancer project on at the moment as well already, but in the other program that was part of the 3 that we released, that heavily focuses on cancer, cystic fibrosis, etc., etc. The whole notion being that we would like to better prepare everybody to feel way more confident about working with these populations. So there's loads of kind of groundwork in the Rebuild course that's aimed at providing that level of confidence to own that situation with the person. Because one thing, this ticks Col off, and he'll talk about this, I'm sure, next week, but a lot of courses, and it'd be interesting to see what the guys think, but a lot of courses that focus especially on kind of like these disease scenarios, they're all about what you can't do with the person.
Yeah, contraindications, yeah.
And it just fills everybody with fear, and they think like, I mean, as I mentioned, Col has a gym, so he's got a team of his own coaches, and a lot of them will go on these courses and then come back to Col and say, well, I'm shitting my pants because if I do the wrong thing with the wrong, like, and it kind of spirals into this sense of anxiety and worry, obviously. So partly for that reason, our approach has always been about, this is what you can do. Here's some red flags, sure, because we don't want to create any harm or, you know, do anyone a disservice, but it's about making you guys feel as confident as possible that whatever question your clients are asking, that you've at least got like a first step you can make, even if you have to refer back, you know, to you guys or to us for extra information. So the course itself, like the mechanics of it, you mean?
Yeah, so just yeah, go on.
So we've got, in Rebuild, there's 62 videos at the moment, 62 episodes. And they're largely featuring Col as program director, program lead. If I'm honest, partly because we filmed the course during COVID lockdown. So we were relatively restricted about who we could invite and who we could involve in the process. Fortunately, with Col having a gym, that was all made quite a lot easier. But yes, we've got 61 videos, and Col presents in those a great deal. A handful of them are like an hour long. There's one actually that we just released this December, which is 2 hours long, which talks about something called hyperphobia, which is probably a conversation for another day. But that's about the notion that during lockdown, everybody is in like a whole other funk, right? And we've all got used to this whole other life. And then when you get spat out, when we go back into normal life after lockdown, the whole adjustment of that and the whole process of that mentally is quite a thing. So that's the only longer session in there. But on average, most of the videos are like kind of 20, 23 minutes long. Designed in that way so that, you know, anybody going through the course can learn stuff on the go, in the bath, in the gym. There's even a few in there that are sort of 2-3 minutes long in length. And as I mentioned before, they're broken down into these subsections of fundamentals, what it is, why we're doing it this way, how you go about it, and then kind of advanced information so that it can be done in like marathon binge watches or little bite-sized bits. On average, most trainers get through the course in like about 30 to 45 days. But it depends a little bit on how much the guys are still working, whether they've got kids, whether they're homeschooling, like the whole 9 yards. But we have had some of the kind of more experienced coaches in terms of years being hands-on with clients, or maybe just love education, generally speaking. A lot of those guys get through the course in about 2 weeks. And then once you come towards the end of the course, there's a little assessment, which for obvious reasons is an online assessment. The guys will go through that, and on successful completion of the assessment, they'll be referred to as a graduate Rebuild certified coach and capable of being hands-on and rehabilitating individuals from COVID. When someone's graduated from the course, they then might jump into one of the other 2 courses or not. Some of the guys kind of just keep kind of focused on Rebuild for the short term. We update the course every month, as I said before, for obvious reasons. We have a duty of care to do that. So in Jan, for example, for Rebuild, we've got vaccine, new strain, and reinfection and transmissions. But then say in Fortitude, just by way of contrast, we've got sessions in there about, which is actually a bit more up your alley, which is around career development, identifying the right mentor for you and that kind of thing. So they're updated every month, so that it means that for those guys who stay with us for longer term, they obviously have access to all of that updated information as they go. But yeah, as long as people are online, they can access it 24/7, anywhere, anytime. Vibes.
Okay, cool.
Netflix.
We've got a few little comments in the Matt Ford saying, "What's up, spoons?"
All right, buddy. Everywhere, that man. Jeez.
No, he is, isn't he? Literally.
When did you work for Bjorgen?
The nightmare he is. Then we've got Harry Hughes, actually, who's just put, "Just got over COVID myself, and it is tough. Struggling to get back to myself and can feel these frustrations. It's always going to be the quick fix crew trying to make a quick pound. Great to hear this conversation." And then other people talking about their clients who've had it and crashed and so on. So it's just good to have this conversation. So that's great. Just to give people a bit of a background of the kind of next steps, and I'll come to you in a minute, Mel, regards to kind of closing this out of what it is, where they can find you and stuff like that. So there's going to be obviously a second part to this, and probably more going forward. In regards to this time next week, well, 3:30 next week, we're going to have Colin, who you've talked about quite heavily throughout this. So we can go into more kind of physiological based questions and stuff like that. So you guys have some, I don't want to say quick wins, but just some knowledge and some confidence in, if this question comes up, this could potentially be the conversation that you could have with this client. This is where to outsource. This is where to find a rebuild coach and all of that type of stuff. So you'll be equipped with that. So obviously next week's kind of episode of this will be quality for you guys to tune into again. I don't know if you have any more questions, Nick. I only have one more question that probably most personal trainers want to ask, but haven't. How much is the course and the program and stuff like that, just so that they are aware? And then off the back of it, where can they then find it?
Got you. Any other questions from you, Nick?
No.
Okay, so the guys can access the course from $33.50 a month, and there'll be, like, Nick and Ant will disclose like a bit of a pure gym special discount code for that, obviously. But so yeah, standard pricing is $33.50 ex VAT a month. As I said before, people can sign up for a month, smash through the course in a month, and then leave us if they want to. So that's like as little as it could cost, or stay with us and keep access to everything else. We designed it to be that flexible and that easy for people to dip in and out of.
Just off the back of that, obviously you've mentioned Fortitude, which is another program. What kind of additional content do you see yourselves putting in there, just so the guys are aware?
Good question. So right now, when you sign up with that $33.50 a month, you'll be granted access to something called a CAWS coach membership, which will give you access to the rebuild course. And then, as you say, Ant, you'll get access to the Fortitude program and the Rebound program. So Fortitude is, well, across all three programs, it's close to about 200 episodes. So there's a lot to go at, kind of, if you want to go balls deep into all that stuff. And Rebound is the course that focuses on, my client's been stuck at home with one dumbbell. How can I keep things spicy, keep them engaged, maybe tackle things differently, learn a few bits from pro sports coaches and so on. There's no assessment with that one. Without taking us down a bit of a rabbit hole with too much information on this, but there's no assessment on that one. It's designed to just be little bits of video that you guys can dip in and out of as you want, kind of every time you need a little bit of inspiration. And it's probably only going to compound what you already know. The Fortitude course, that's where we'll give you, in a similar way as we have with Rebuild and COVID, we'll give you like the first steps as to if Sheila walks in and she says, amidst all this COVID nonsense, she's been living with diabetes and she wants to change the situation, it gives you enough to easily work with her for kind of 12 to 16 weeks and so on. And that's with diabetes, cancer, cystic fibrosis, metabolic syndrome, stroke, or cardiac disease. So all of that is in kind of the 33.50. So if you were a hyper-keno, and you smash through, which you could do, you smash through Rebuild and Fortitude within the space of a month, you could pick up 2 certificates in that if you wanted to. I didn't mention before, and I don't want to info overload, but a couple of key things that are a part of that when you asked before about the course structure. And within Rebuild, there's a live Q&A with Carl every single month as well. So anybody who's a member can dial into that, jump on with Carl, we'll update business critical stuff like vaccines and so on, but then the guys can throw out queries they've got about client scenarios and case studies or stuff they might be stuck on. And obviously they all, like, you guys all then kind of share best practice amongst each other in that way. So there's one of those in Rebuild, in Rebound, and there's 3 in Fortitude. So if you're a CAWS member, you've got pretty much the opportunity to dive into 5 live Q&As with Carl every month if you wanted to. And I mentioned before kind of about the dipping in and out, like the way it's structured is something called a spiral curriculum. I didn't know what that was a year ago. But it essentially means that you would, like, within sort of the thread of every program and every video, and even between all of the programs, there's like a little bit of a nugget from a previous video that you'll have watched. So at face value, it almost seems like it's a bit repetitive, but actually it's done that way so that it helps, you know, you guys, it helps that information to stick. So that then if you've been away from the content for a while, you're faced with a client scenario and you're like, oh geez, I probably need a bit of a refresh on XYZ. You haven't then got to go and resit the whole course. You can just go back to certain videos which will prompt you the right amount of information you need about that topic without having to go through 5 or 6 videos, something like that.
Okay, cool.
Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. Last one from me. So obviously, and it leads to where they can find you. I'm conscious of, obviously, we've got another week, it's escalating. I'm now hearing of more personal trainers turning around and saying I'm getting inquiries off a new client who's had COVID, and I've got an existing client who's got COVID. So I'm hearing that more, whereas we've not heard that for the whole of the last 10 months, but I've heard it more in the past 2 weeks than I have in the last 10 months. If that's the case, personal trainers flapping a little bit, which is normal. Where can they come and find you guys for a bit of information or reassurance?
If they head to our YouTube channel, and it's literally CAWS Daily, but I can always send a link to you guys. But if you head to our YouTube channel, there is probably 20 odd videos on there already, where if you look first for a video that's titled FAQ, there'll be questions that we've been asked by coaches that Carl directly responds to that we've recorded. In the comments under those videos, we'll tell you what FAQs we've answered. So you can have a squiz in there and see if it's relevant for you to watch before you dive into it based on the questions that you might have been asked. There's also quite a few general videos in there that are recordings of presentations that Carl and I have done that will provide a bit of context and some of like the general messages around, it's not just cough, cold and isolation. It could be this severe. Here's a massive what not to do. Here's a massive what to do. We put one up yesterday actually, and one of the FAQs was from a member, and it was the one who'd said, I've got COVID, I would normally be smashing out 5 or 10 Ks. What do I do? When we're asked that, we're always going to say, work with a coach. So that's where we feed the leads and then we send them out to our coaches. But so as to not leave people hanging, we did do a bit of a response on that. So that went up yesterday. So that would probably be useful for the guys to have a little look at as well. And then anything else, generally, our website is trainwithcaws, which is CAWS.com. And they can see like a couple of intro videos on there about Rebuild and the other course as well, which will give them a little bit of a patter to at least start a conversation with, or confidently respond to some initial questions that you might get asked, that gives you some breathing room to go back and look at other stuff before being back with the client again.
Cool. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we've obviously got a couple of guys who we know really, really well coming through the course at this moment in time. I'm sure we will be doing it at some point pretty soon as well. So obviously you'll have real-time feedback on that from the stuff that we get from the guys. And obviously Nick's posting quite a bit of the videos that you've done in the past and all of that. So you're going to have a CAWS overload, but in the best interest of you guys and your clients.
Thank you. And as you said before, really, like, I guess any questions that the guys have, I'm the warm-up act, really, in essence. Like, Cole's the brain that we're going to roll out next week. Do you know what I mean? So any questions, if you've already had questions from clients, I guess one of the key things that we talked about, didn't we, guys, was start thinking about those questions now, because we can arm a ton of those at Cole next week. If there's lots, we can obviously just bunch them into themes and stuff like that as well. I did just make a note as well to say to Harry about his comment about the fact that he'd had COVID. That's kind of, and I won't get too evangelical, I promise. But there is still this big thing where COVID's just a cough and cold, and for some people it is just a cough and cold. But unless you've met someone, or you've had it, or your auntie's had it, or whatever, it can feel like it wouldn't be that hard to deal with in a kind of a client scenario. So what Harry says there is very accurate, and it's given him a bit of an appreciation. And actually, we just had somebody come through the course who, by his own admission, wasn't that enamored about getting on the course in the first place, because he thought, this is going to be a COVID course, surely this is going to be quite mind-numbing. But he said, in his own words, he jumped on the course, he got more into it the more the course progressed, because it kind of surprised him actually that it was of his interest. But midway through, he got COVID. So because he was going, that he said to him that obviously that hands-on experience that he was having gave him a different level of appreciation for what he was going through. And then of course, double wins, he could manage his own rehab. But it's so true that unless you're faced with that first client scenario, or you've had it, it is hard to kind of picture what's going on. And I guess that's kind of part of our mission, really. Like, initially it was, we want to be an education company, but now it's become more about, as you two have heard me bleat on about, it's more about us also wanting to help people who are stuck in these really shitty places.
Yeah, we've had some really nice comments, so obviously everyone seems pretty hyped up about it and wants to know more. We just had a quick question. Yeah, go on.
Andor asked, will I be able to advertise myself as a COVID specialist trainer or something similar?
Yes, 100%, and I would absolutely encourage it. There is some, is there a video on YouTube? There may not be, I'll check. There might be a video on YouTube on that, but we do talk about that a lot. And there is a video on that going into Rebuild. I can save this for next week or another session, because otherwise it's just going to be more airtime from me. But there's a whole like series of steps that you can take even before you're certified, which starts marketing to your local client base, local businesses, local schools, etc., about the fact that you are certified. And also, as like kind of a little mini win along the way, we've noticed that because it's COVID, like the level of referrals is insane. Because even if you're putting stuff out there on social media or on LinkedIn to say, hey, I've done this, I'm certified, even if someone hasn't had COVID, now we all know at least a few people who have had COVID. And so it's almost like a safer form of referral, because it's not like you're pushing your mates towards PT, you're pushing your mates towards help in that way. So yes, we absolutely encourage that, and we help with that, as well as other things like tools to connect with your local GP and stuff like that.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Absolutely mega. Okay, cool. So you've set next week up nicely. So next week, for those who are watching this back, we'll be on at 3:30 with Carl. You're with us as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I'll join.
Yeah. So we'll go into more, obviously, physiological side of things. Carl will support us a little bit more in that treatment of clients and more about the course and stuff like that. So that's something to look forward to a hell of a lot. Yeah, and that's us. We'll stick this on a YouTube link as well, and get this shared out into different areas. But we appreciate your time. You're a legend for doing what you are doing. Yeah, so we massively appreciate your time. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming on to everyone. Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers, mate.
everyone. Thanks for having me, and speak to you all next week.
Bye.
See you, mate.